Hi, good morning, everybody, and thank you very much for the Infant and Toddler Forum for inviting me today. I'm really delighted to be able to share with you some of the fantastic work that's been going on at the Health Behaviour Research Centre at UCL. So as Atul said, I'm going to be talking to you today about feeding young children, and particularly that how much is on the plate, so portion size, is just as important as what children are eating. And all the data I'm presenting today comes from the Gemini twin study, which I'll talk a bit about later. So Atul gave a very nice introduction to the issue of childhood obesity, so I don't really need to stress the issue, but everybody likes a few more stats, don't they? So the National Child Measurement Programme, which I'm sure you're all aware of, children aged 4 to 5 years and aged 10 to 11 years, so when they enter primary school and leave primary school, have their height and weight measured, and they're classified as healthy weight, underweight, overweight or obese. And according to the recent figures, 1 in 5 children aged 4 to 5 years are currently overweight or obese in the UK, and that increases to 1 in 3 children aged 10 to 11 years. Atul mentioned this earlier, so a review by Simmons recently. Obese children are 5 times more likely to be obese in adulthood than those who are a healthy weight. It's also associated with long-term health effects into adolescence and adulthood. So it's associated with physical morbidity in adulthood and premature mortality. Children that have obesity in childhood are more likely to be depressed and more likely to be bullied than their healthy weight peers. So there's obviously psychological effects that are associated with overweight and obesity in childhood. And then to add to that, there's obviously a huge economic cost to society. So it's estimated to cost the NHS more than £5 billion per year. And that's a result of the comorbid health conditions that result from childhood overweight, such as diabetes, hypertension, etc. So this all highlights the importance of identifying factors that influence growth trajectories in early life. So if we think about weight gain in very simple terms, if calories in exceed calories out, an individual will gain weight. But this is the Obesity Systems Map by Foresight, which I'm sure many of you will have seen. And I obviously don't expect you to be able to read any of that, but it basically highlights the complexity of obesity. So energy balance is in the middle, and it shows all the factors that are potentially influencing obesity. And if we just break that down a little bit, it's thought that there are 7 main factors that influence obesity. So let's see if I can get this pointer to work. Okay. So we have biology, so an individual's genes. We know that weight is highly heritable. Then we have, obviously, the physical activity environment. So if we think about activity environment itself, things like proximity to playgrounds and parks for children is going to have an impact on a child's actual physical activity. Societal influences, so things like the media, food advertising on TV. And then we have individual psychology, so an individual's response to food, for example. So if an individual sees food advertising on TV, are they more likely to want to consume snacks, etc.? The food environment, so the availability and palatability of foods, the portions served in restaurants, that's all going to have an influence on food consumption. And what I'm going to be talking about today focuses mainly on individual psychology, so in particular an individual's appetite or appetitive traits, and food consumption, so how much and how often children are eating. So we know that over the last 30 years there's been an increase in prevalence of obesity, and that's largely put down to changes to the environment. So sedentary lifestyles are much easier these days with personalised transport, iPads, televisions, etc. People are less mobile. And also the food environment. So food has become very palatable, very cheap, available, and energy dense, and served in large portions. But despite that, not everybody has become obese in the last 30 years. And there is, even in very early life, there's variation, individual variation in weight gain. So this is data from the Gemini twin study, and you can see that there are obviously some children that gain a lot of weight in early life and others that gain very little, and that there's a normal distribution. So this highlights that there are individual differences in susceptibility to the obesogenic environment. And the behavioural susceptibility theory, developed by Professor Jane Wardle, tries to explain this by suggesting that the basis for the gene-environment interaction is that some individuals that inherit a set of genes that make them more susceptible to they develop appetitive traits that make them more susceptible to potentially overeating. So there are two aspects of appetite that are thought to play a role in weight gain. One is food responsiveness, so that's an individual's responsiveness to food cues. So if they walk past a bakery, for example, they see the pastries, they can smell the pastries, they're more likely to want to consume the pastries. Individuals that have higher food responsiveness are thought to have been shown to gain more weight during early childhood. The other trait is something called satiety responsiveness, so that's an individual's responsiveness to feelings of fullness. So individuals that have poorer satiety responsiveness have also been shown to gain weight. And it's thought that individuals that inherit a set of genes that confer higher food responsiveness and lower satiety responsiveness are more likely to overconsume and subsequently gain weight. But this model also takes into account social factors, so the availability of food, for example, and metabolic factors, so things like satiety hormones, just to basically show that, for example, under conditions of famine, nobody, regardless of their genetic susceptibility to overeating, is going to gain weight. So as I mentioned, the two key aspects of appetite that have been linked to weight gain are food responsiveness and satiety responsiveness. So they're what I'll be focusing on today. And we've looked at these aspects of appetite in a large cohort of twins from the Gemini twin study. So this was a cohort set up in 2007 to study the genetic and environmental influences on weight gain during early life. And it was set up in 2007, and at baseline it had almost 5,000 children, so almost 2,500 twin pairs. And as part of the Gemini twin study, we've collected data on appetite. For this research, I'm presenting data from 16 months of age. So parents completed the Child Eating Behaviour Questionnaire, developed by Jane Wardle at UCL. And here's some example items for food responsiveness. So if allowed to, my child would eat too much. So a parent would rate from never to always on this scale. And never to always is rated on a scale of 1 to 5. So they would complete each of these items for food responsiveness, and the child would be given an average score on food responsiveness. And the higher the score, the higher their food responsiveness. Similarly, for satiety responsiveness, example items, my child leaves food on his or her plate at the end of a meal. So if a parent reports never, that indicates they have poorer satiety responsiveness and respond less well to feelings of fullness. So the lower the score on satiety responsiveness, the poorer the satiety responsiveness. And we've shown in Gemini that we've compared siblings, so non-identical siblings, same-sex siblings. We've looked at their weight trajectories from 0 to 15 months based on the disconcordance for satiety responsiveness and food responsiveness. So the twins were at least one standard deviation different on their satiety responsiveness and food responsiveness scores. And what you can see is that the blue line represents children that have lower scores on satiety responsiveness, so they have poorer responsiveness to feelings of fullness. And the brown line are those that scored higher, so they respond more well to feelings of fullness. And what you can see is that the children that had lower satiety responsiveness gained weight at a faster rate from 0 to 15 months, suggesting that satiety responsiveness plays a role in weight gain. And similarly for food responsiveness, the brown line represents those that had a higher food responsiveness score, so responded more strongly to cues for food, and they gained weight at a faster rate than their sibling who scored lower on food responsiveness. So we know that these aspects of appetite are linked to weight gain, but what we don't know is, are there specific patterns of eating that characterise these two traits? So if we try to think about daily energy intake, it's the number of times an individual eats and drinks multiplied by the amount of energy they consume every time they eat and drink. So I'll be referring to these as meal frequency and meal size, respectively. So do meal frequency and meal size tap into food responsiveness and or satiety responsiveness? And to do this, we collected dietary data from 2,336 of the Gemini children. And this data was collected when they were 21 months old. And 3-day diaries were completed by the parents. So they were given a food and drink diary and also a food portion guide, which sort of guided them on how to report the brand of food, the portion sizes, basically. So we were interested in the portion sizes consumed, the amount of food consumed. So this just gives an example of how a diary would have been completed. So parents were asked to put the time of the eating occasion, where and with whom the occasion took place, and also to give a description of the food item. And also, it's not shown here, but based on the food portion guide, they would give an indication of the picture that represents the amount that was consumed. And this here, so based on the time, any food item consumed at a single clock time would be deemed an eating occasion if food was consumed. So yeah, an eating occasion was any food consumed at a single clock time. Meal size was the amount of energy consumed during each eating occasion, so calories consumed. And meal frequency was the number of eating occasions in a day. And if we look at the associations between food responsiveness, satiety responsiveness, and meal size and meal frequency, what we find is that children that had lower satiety responsiveness scores, so they responded less well to feelings of fullness, they consumed larger meal sizes, so they were having more calories each time they ate. And the difference, if we compare a child that had a score of 5, so had the highest responsiveness to satiety, with a child who scored 1, the lowest score on the CEBQ, it was a difference of 37 calories during each eating occasion. So that may not sound much, but if you think that children in Gemini were eating approximately 5 times per day, so say 3 meals, 2 snacks, you multiply 37 times 5, you can see how over time, over the course of a month, children that have lower satiety responsiveness would be consuming approximately 6,000 more calories a month. And these are children that are 21 months old. Similarly, we explored, I will just say actually that satiety responsiveness wasn't associated with the number of eating occasions. It was quite specifically associated with the meal size, which you might expect given that if an individual responds less well to feelings of fullness, potentially they'll keep eating for longer periods of time, but won't necessarily eat more often. Higher food responsiveness, however, so children that are more responsive to cues for food, over the course of a week, we're having approximately 3 eating occasions more per week than children that were scoring 1 on food responsiveness, so we're not very responsive to food. And again, okay, 3 more snacks per week may not sound much, but an average meal size in Gemini was 180 calories. So again, over the course of a week or a month, children that had higher food responsiveness would be consuming over 2,000 calories more per month. And you can see how potentially this is a potential reason why children with low satiety responsiveness and or high food responsiveness are gaining weight. But what we don't know is, do larger meals and or eating frequently actually lead to weight gain? Is there an association there? So to do that, what we did, we looked at, I'll just go back here. We looked at how within Gemini, we collected height and weight measurements for children every 3 months up to the age of 5 years. So we looked at weight gain between the age of 2 to 5 years and how meal size and meal frequency at 21 months were independently associated with weight gain over time. So we adjusted for things like sex, birth weight, baseline weight, so at 2 years, so that we could see how, independent of earlier weight, diet was influencing weight gain. Because, obviously you could say if a child was heavier at 2 years, it might be they're just tracking over time and it's nothing to do with diet. And what we found was meal frequency, so the number of times a child was eating in a day, was not associated with weight gain between 2 to 5 years. However, meal size was significantly associated with weight gain. So for every extra 10 calories consumed per eating occasion, so per meal, per snack, a child would gain 1.5 grams per week. Again, it may not sound very much, but these children are 21 months old. This is per week. So between 2 to 5 years of age, you can see how that trajectory would be increasing over time. And this graph just quite nicely highlights that. So what you can see here, this is at 2 years of age. And the red line represents meal size, and the blue line represents, red line is meal frequency, the blue line is meal size, and it compares normal weight children with the overweight and obese children. And what you can see is that both the normal weight and the overweight children at 2 years were both eating around 5 times per day, which is what you may expect, 3 meals, 2 snacks. But the difference is that the overweight and obese children were consuming significantly more calories each time they ate. So this difference at 21 months of age is around 12 calories per eating occasion. Again, sounds like not very much. You wouldn't even probably be able to notice on the plate. They're eating 5 times per day. That's 60 calories per day more in the overweight children, 420 calories per week, almost 2,000 calories per month. So you can see how, over time, these small increments in meal size will potentially lead to weight gain over time. We also looked at the risk of overweight according to meal size at 21 months. And per 100 calories consumed per eating occasion, children would be at an increased risk of 9% increased risk of being overweight at 2 years. But meal frequency was not associated with any increased risk of overweight. So, okay, we know that overweight children are consuming larger meals, they're having more calories. Is that because they're consuming different foods, so more calorific, energy-dense foods? Or is it they're simply having similar foods to the normal weight children, but they're having them in larger quantities? So to do that, we looked at the energy density per eating occasion across normal weight and overweight children. And what you can see was there was absolutely no difference. So normal weight and overweight children, their meals and snacks, on average, were 1.3 calories per gram. Similarly, we look at the percentage of protein, so the composition of meals and snacks. Again, almost identical. Percentage of carbohydrate and percentage of fat. There was no significant difference across the normal weight and overweight children in terms of the composition of their meals and snacks. But if we look at the grams, so the amount consumed in terms of quantity and portion size, overweight children were consuming significantly larger amounts of food. So we can conclude from this, they were simply having similar types of food to the normal weight children, but in larger amounts. And that was statistically significant. What we've done is we've replicated this in a younger age group, a nationally representative sample in the UK. So this is the Diet and Nutrition Survey for Infants and Young Children, which many of you will have heard of. So this was a one-off survey conducted in 2011. Involves 2,683 children, slightly younger than Gemini, so between 4 to 18 months. But again, parents completed 3 and 4 day unweighed diet diaries. And weight data was also available. And again, we're looking at weight, so cross-sectional weight, between 4 to 18 months and associations with meal size and meal frequency. And it was all coded in exactly the same way as in Gemini. And again, what we found, so this is a younger age group, meal frequency was not associated with weight. However, children that were consuming, for every 10 calories consumed extra per meal or snack, children were 20 grams heavier. Again, that may not sound much, but these children are between 4 to 18 months old. And this graph basically exactly replicates what we found in Gemini. So you can see that they're slightly younger, so they're consuming between 4 to 5 meals and snacks per day. And there's no difference between the normal weight and overweight children. But the overweight children, again, it's a difference of 11 calories per meal or snack. The meal sizes are slightly smaller, as you'd expect, because they're younger, but the difference is what's important. So the difference between the overweight and the normal weight children is around 11 calories per eating occasion. So again, you multiply that by the 4 to 5 times eating per day. You can see how over time, even in this very young age group, overweight children are consuming significantly more calories due to larger meal sizes. And again, per 100 calories, they were at an increased risk of 9% of overweight. But there was no increased risk of overweight or obesity based on meal frequency. And again, if we tried to look at the composition of meals by energy density, there was absolutely no difference across the normal weight and overweight children. But what there was a difference in, similar to Gemini, the overweight children are consuming significantly larger quantities of food every time they eat. So the implications of these results are that based on appetite, I've shown there are behavioural expressions of avid appetites, and these include eating too much, so having larger meals if children have lower satiety responsiveness, and eating potentially too often if they have higher food responsiveness. And this suggests that some infants and toddlers may be poorer at self-regulating energy intake and are more susceptible to over-consuming. So there's this idea that very young infants will regulate their intake. So, for example, they will reduce the amount they eat each time if they're eating very frequently, or if they eat less often, they will consume larger portions. But they regulate to the extent that they don't over-consume. But this research is suggesting there are certain children, as a result of their appetitive traits, that may over-consume. So children that have lower satiety responsiveness consume larger portions or larger meals. They're not necessarily reducing the number of times they eat in a day, and that may lead to overconsumption. Similarly, children that have higher food responsiveness, they're eating more often. They're not necessarily reducing the amount that they're consuming each time they eat. I've shown that meal size in particular is a critical driver of early weight gain. And while the effect sizes are small, it's 11 calories, 12 calories each meal, you can see how these small increases in meal size every time children eat can potentially lead to weight gain. And this offers a potential target for prevention of obesity in early childhood, so starting very early in life. And it highlights that there's vigilance needed regarding portion sizes for children. So the Infant and Toddler Forum obviously have evidence-based resources to help guide parents, but that more advice is needed, potentially tailored advice for parents of children with these specific appetitive traits that may make them susceptible to weight gain. I'd just like to finish by obviously acknowledging the collaborators and funders, so Professor Jane Wardle, Professor Susan Jebb and Dr. Ellen van Jaarsveld. They've all been integral in the Gemini twin study. Dr. Claire Llewellyn, Dr. Alison Files, both at UCL, Dr. Laura Johnson at Bristol University, and David Boniface, a statistician at UCL. And finally, I'd just like to dedicate the talk to Jane Wardle. She developed and set up the Gemini twin study, and was extremely passionate about obesity research, and without her, none of this research would be possible. Thank you.